The High Council of Aethelgard did not just strip me of my title, they threw my life's work into the ceremonial fire pits right before my eyes. I stood at the center of the celestial chamber, watching the ancient parchment burn, while High Archon Malakor delivered his sentence with a smug, arrogant laugh. "You are a mere archivist, Clara," he sneered, his golden robes shimmering in the starlight. "Your blood lacks the pure ancestral lineage required to sit at our table. You are stripped of your rank, banished from the Silver City, and uninvited from the Grand Convergence." They thought they were castigating a powerless clerk. They had no idea I had spent the last 10 years archiving the very foundation of their magic. The other 11 council members laughed, a low, echoing chorus of condescension that filled the grand stone vaults. To them, magic was an inherited luxury, a divine right passed down through corrupted bloodlines that ruled over the mortal realms. They viewed my system of logical categorization, my detailed ledgers, and my verification of arcane source materials as a lower-class insult to their natural talent. Malakor waved his hand, signaling the armored guards to remove me. "Go back to the mortal mud, Clara. The High Council has no need for a glorified accountant." To understand why these ancient narcissists felt so untouchable, you have to understand how Aethelgard operated. For 3 centuries, the Council had held a monopoly over all high-tier sorcery, charging mortal kingdoms millions in gold and sovereign labor just to access basic rain-calling or defensive barrier runes. They claimed their power came from their pure, unyielding connection to the ethereal source. But as the chief overseer of the arcane archives, I knew a dirty little secret they had forgotten. Their magic wasn't divine. It was contractual. 5 years ago, while cataloging the foundational baseline scrolls buried deep within the forbidden obsidian vaults, I discovered the Prime Pact. It was the original, legalistic magical contract signed between the first mortal sorcerers and the ancient ethereal entities who lent them their raw power. The contract wasn't written in poetic spells. It was structured in tight, binding celestial legalese. Every single spell cast by the High Council required a specific systemic exchange, and more importantly, a strict adherence to ethical boundary terms. As I audited the Saadion Purain ledgers against the current Council's activities, I uncovered a massive criminal systemic breach. Malakor and his inner circle hadn't been using their own energy. They had been illegally siphoning raw power from public leylines meant to sustain mortal farmlands, masking their theft as divine tax. They had violated the core sustainability clauses of the Prime Pact over 4,000 times. If the celestial entities realized what was happening, the contract would auto-liquidate. I didn't confront them then. I knew that if I brought this evidence to the Council directly, they would simply execute me in secret and burn the vault to hide their tracks. Instead, for 2 solid years, I worked 18-hour nights, systematically duplicating every single ledger page, every leyline siphon log, and every fraudulent contract note onto independent, highly secure silver-parchment sheets that couldn't be destroyed by Council flame magic. So when Malakor stood before me in his grand, arrogant glory and banished me from the Silver City, I didn't beg for my title. I didn't drop to my knees or scream for mercy. I let them watch me walk out of the grand double doors of the castle palace with my chin held high. They thought they were casting out a broken clerk. They didn't realize they had just released the only person holding the master key to their entire legal and magical survival. I retreated to the lower mortal valleys, far outside the Council's radar, and established a private sovereign sanctuary inside an ancient, abandoned stone watchtower. Using the silver duplicates I had extracted, I set up a comprehensive magical auditing grid. Julian, a brilliant mortal defensive tactician who had long been oppressed by the Council's heavy magical taxation, joined my side. Together, we prepared to execute the ultimate audit. For the first 3 days after my exile, the Council celebrated their pure-blood victory. But on the 4th day, the system started to fail. Because they had burned my active management ledgers, they didn't realize that the complex safety arrays holding back the raw, volatile feedback of the siphoned ley lines required daily manual calibration. Without my systematic maintenance, the magical infrastructure of Aethelgard began to crack. While they were frantically trying to patch the unstable arrays, I officially initiated the sovereign audit. I didn't send a letter of complaint. I utilized the foundational protocols of the Prime Pact to send a direct, binding celestial enforcement claim into the ethereal network. The claim stated that the current council was in total default of their ethical boundary clauses, and I was invoking the right of independent asset verification. By Tuesday morning, a high-ranking council messenger arrived at my valley tower, flanked by 4 elite Griffin riders. He didn't come with an apology. He came with an arrogant command. He unrolled a gold-stamped scroll, demanding my immediate return to the city to fix the leaking leyline arrays, offering to restore my base salary, but refusing to reinstate my council title. I didn't even look at the scroll. "Tell Malakor," I said calmly, my voice carrying an echo of raw, newly uncovered power, "that I do not work for thieves, and I do not take orders from historical footnotes. The council chose to burn the ledger. Now they get to burn with the debt. The audit has already been filed, and the opening bell of the Celestial Court rings tomorrow at noon." The messenger laughed, claiming the council was above any law, before flying away. They still thought magic was about willpower, not contracts. The next day was the Grand Convergence, the annual high society gala where kings, queens, and wealthy merchant lords from 10 different realms gathered in Aethelgard to pay their multi-million gold tributes to the council in exchange for magical protection. The grand ballroom of the Silver Palace was filled with luxury, wine, and excessive displays of pride. Malakor stood at the central podium, raising his golden scepter to toast their absolute dominance. Just as Malakor began his speech, the massive glass dome roof of the ballroom didn't shatter. It turned completely opaque, shifting into a deep, heavy midnight purple color. The floating starlight globes instantly went dark, cutting off the room's illumination. The heavy stone doors of the ballroom swung open with a sound like thunder. Walking down the center aisle, dressed not in the rags of an exile, but in a premium, sharp, dark navy blue tailored business suit infused with silver runes, was me. The guests gasped, a tidal wave of whispers filling the room as the guards instantly drew their glowing silver halberds. Malakor's face turned bright red with pure narcissistic fury. "How dare you show your face here, clerk?" he shouted into his amplification spell, his voice shaking the crystal pillars. "You were banished under pain of execution. Guards, incinerate this trespasser immediately." 4 elite battle mages stepped forward, unleashing a combined volley of high-tier fire and lightning spells directly at my chest. The guests screamed, expecting me to turn to ash, but I didn't even lift a hand to defend myself. I simply raised a single silver duplicate scroll. The moment the destructive magic reached within 3 feet of me, a massive, ancient geometric shield of pure white light materialized, absorbing the spells instantly and grounding the energy harmlessly into the marble floor. The entire room went completely dead silent. The battle mages staggered back, their hands shaking as they tried to channel a second attack, but their hands suddenly sparkled with dead, gray ash. "You cannot cast offensive magic within these borders today, gentlemen," I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the silent hall without needing an amplification spell. Under Section 4, Paragraph 9 of the Prime Pact, all active combat sorcery is automatically frozen upon the filing of a formal, high-tier corporate asset dispute. I tapped my crystal staff against the marble floor, and a massive, glowing holographic display materialized in the center of the ballroom, projecting thousands of flowing data sheets, leyline siphon logs, and fraudulent banking transactions directly into the air for every king, queen, and merchant lord to see. "Let us talk about what the council has really been doing with your gold tributes," I said with a calm, mocking smile. The data didn't lie. The holographic charts clearly showed that for 30 years, the Council had been intentionally restricting the water-carrying ley lines of the lower mortal kingdoms, causing artificial droughts, just so they could charge a triple premium for miraculous rain spells. The kings and queens began to stand up from their tables, their expressions turning from confusion to roaring royal outrage. Malakor panicked. He tried to shatter the holographic projection with his scepter, but the ancient celestial data framework was entirely outside his control. "This is a fabrication, a lie from a bitter, talentless peasant who wants to steal our ancestral glory," he screamed, his voice cracking as his old money composure completely dissolved in front of his entire investor base. But I was already moving to the final execution phase. "High Archon Malakor," I said, my voice cutting through his screaming denial like an executioner's blade. You have violated the core sustainability terms of the Prime Pact exactly 4,212 times. As the designated sovereign auditor of the Arcane Archives, I hereby declare the Aethelgard Council to be in total default. I invoke the immediate liquidation of your magical credit lines. The moment the words left my lips, the ancient stone floor beneath the council members began to glow with a brilliant, blinding white light. Malakor and the 11 other sorcerers let out a collective, agonizing cry as waves of glowing golden energy were physically pulled out of their chests, flowing directly into my crystal staff. Their scepters cracked, their glowing robes turned into dull, common cloth, and their physical ages caught up to them in a matter of seconds. They fell to their knees, panting, weeping, and completely empty. The great, untouchable, pure-blood sorcerers of Aethelgard had been reduced to nothing more than frail, ordinary old men, stripped of every single ounce of siphoned magic they had stolen over 3 centuries. The golden scepter in Malakor's hand shattered into dry, valueless sand, spilling across the polished floor. The foreign kings and queens stood in absolute awe, a profound silence falling over the entire 200-person gala. I stood over the fallen council, looking down with absolute dignity and cold self-respect. The High Council is officially dissolved, I announced clearly. As of this noon bell, all leylines are permanently unlocked and returned to public mortal control. The Silver City's assets are now under the management of the Sovereign Merit Archive. Then, the king who had first stood up raised his sword into the air, shouting my name. Within seconds, the entire Grand Hall erupted into a roaring standing ovation. The very monarchs who had spent decades under the thumb of the council's extortion were now cheering for my audit with a level of energy that shook the high castle spires. The trap had snapped shut flawlessly. The next morning, I didn't celebrate with a superficial victory feast. At 7 a.m. sharp, dressed in an immaculate, dark charcoal-tailored business suit, matching the face and look from your images, I walked back into the High Palace's executive library. I sat down with Julian and a team of independent mortal scholars to systematically rewrite the magical distribution codes for the entire continent. At 9 a.m., my library doors opened slowly. It was Malakor. He didn't walk with his old money, arrogant stride. He was hunched over, leaning on a common wooden cane, weeping openly as he approached my desk, begging me to restore just a tiny fraction of his magical essence so he wouldn't die of old age in the lower mortal slums. "Mr. Malakor," I said calmly, my voice completely flat and unyielding as I looked into his frantic eyes. "When I stood at your altar, you burned my life's work and told me to crawl in the mortal mud. You didn't care about mercy when you thought you owned the sky. I do not care about your personal comfort now. Your life will be spent under ordinary mortal laws. Good luck." I gestured for the guards to remove him. The former council members were relocated to the lower agricultural valleys, the very lands they had starved for centuries. They were assigned to basic community service, working the farmlands alongside the ordinary mortals they had once looked down upon. Malakor's face was no longer on a golden monument. His booking registry was filed under common debtor. 2 weeks later, Julian and I stood on the high stone terrace of the Silver City, watching the valley below. For the first time in 300 years, the ley lines were flowing completely free, bathing the farmlands in a beautiful, natural emerald green light. The crops were blooming, the water was clean, and the toxic noise of old money sorcery was officially dead. A month into his sentence, Malakor sent a frantic, handwritten parchment to my office through a sympathetic guard, claiming that I had rigged the audit and used celestial entities to set up a false trial. I didn't even read past the first sentence. I tossed it straight into the white-hot magical disposal brazier on my desk, watching it turn to clean, silent ash. I used the liquidated assets of the old council to establish the Sovereign Merit Academy, a free institution designed explicitly to train young, talented mortal minds in the logical, structured, and balanced use of leyline magic, ensuring that no inherited elite could ever monopolize the world's source code again. My firm moved into the highest spire penthouse of the financial tower in Aethelgard. Sitting at my glass desk, looking down at the thriving magical metropolis below, matching the appearance from your images, I knew that every single brick of this new world was built on transparency, hard work, and bulletproof receipts. An arrogant narcissist always expects you to fight on their dramatic, emotional level. They expect you to scream, to gossip, or to run away when they strip you of your title. But the secret to winning is simple. Stay completely calm, protect your digital and physical data, and let your legal contracts do all the fighting for you. Julian and I eventually built a private lakeside sanctuary far away from high society magical politics. Sitting on the wooden deck at twilight, watching the dark water ripple under the purple sky, the memory of Malakor shouting in his golden council robes felt like a small, pathetic scene from a completely different lifetime. As our Academy's network crossed the 50 million gold mark, several of the old money socialites who had laughed during my banishment tried to send lavish magical gifts and alliance contracts to my office. They wrote about misunderstandings and wanting to rebuild old ties. My response was always the same. Return to sender, address unknown. Malakor thought he could dictate my value by burning my ledger and uninviting me from his exclusive council table. In doing so, he forced me to pull up his family's debt files and take over his entire magical infrastructure. Never allow a toxic system or an arrogant boss to compromise your boundaries. True victory isn't about shouting, castigating, or seeking active emotional revenge. It's about building a life so completely independent, transparent, and legally sound that your absolute boundaries enforce themselves. They wanted a public show, but they ended up with a public liquidation. I took their arrogance, flipped the foundational source code notes with the celestial entities, and turned a malicious banishment into a historic continental victory. Stand firm in your purpose, protect your independent identity, keep your forensic receipts, and let the vipers of envy crawl away into their own self-made ruin while you continue to rise. If you believe that independent hard work, keeping your data clean, setting ironclad boundaries against toxic narcissists, and watching poetic financial and magical justice take down arrogant elites is the ultimate path to victory, hit that like button right now. Drop your powerful experiences and thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more deep, cinematic sagas of emotional victory. Thank you for watching, and remember, never let an envious sorcerer uninvite you from the council when you have the power to audit their entire empire out of existence.